Okay, good afternoon to all of you, and welcome to this session on smart manufacturing. What we will do in the course of the next an hour is going to look at the aspects of smart manufacturing, not just from a point of view of what smart manufacturing is all about, but also discuss some of the issues around financing. We will look at more of examples of real manufacturing practitioners taking it in their own countries. And we will just do a quick round of introduction across the table. So maybe we'll start with you. So you need to press that, Rajiv.
Rajiv Kochar. I run a financial services group out of Singapore, which is investment banking and credit fund that we're just launching. Also co-promoted a fintech firm headquartered in Singapore with main operations in India and expanding into Southeast Asia.
Sorry.
My name is Eduard Hoeberichts. I'm here for FabMax. FabMax is planning the first and building the first chip back-end facility here in Binjung, which we hope to announce early next year. My background has been in in the semiconductor industry for more than 25 years. Chip manufacturing requires smart manufacturing requires chips that are used and sensors that are used to register data and use the data to improve the efficiency. So Industry 4.0, smart manufacturing, chip technology is my background. And as an add-on, I come here to Vietnam since 10 years, and we are working closely with NXP to start the first chip back-end manufacturing facilities next year.
Thanks, Edwin. William?
Hi, William Ting, California admitted attorney, former advisor to Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, the world's largest wafer in the world. Right now, I am partner and general counsel to Quant Capital, a regional private equity firm based in Shanghai. We are also looking at emerging technology investments. Currently, I am spearheading the group's efforts to tokenize the world, security tokens. Second project I'm leading is the end-to-end data monetization project. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Xuat, I'm from Myanmar. I'm in manufacturing. My company is called Xuat Electronic Industry. Under our umbrella, we manufacture electrical and electronic devices, mainly in inverters and transformers, just for the household uses, not for the industry uses. And other branches are like we produce UPVC doors and windows, and we also do like woodcraft with the CNC machines and stuff. Thank you.
I'll introduce myself. I'm Suman. Suman Bose. I am currently I'm doing two stuff. One is I'm advising some boards and corporations on their digital transformation. The other one is I'm part of an executive partner to a private equity called Loomis Partners. We are raising the next capital and feeling the challenge of capital deployment in the age of, as somebody said, the new age of capitalism, if I can, and maybe a little more of that we will while we're having our conversation around what Industry 4.0 means to not just to manufacturing, but to general deployment of capital in the market.
Hi everyone, my name is Vibun Sitimolada. I'm from Laos, and first of all, I would like to thank you for having me here, and very honored to be part of the speakers panel here. My business is in construction. We basically build factories, factory facilities, um, and we are working with developers. Also, we provide consultancy mainly in mining and energy sector in Laos. I've come from a background of industry in terms of asset management and maintenance in factories. So I hope to be able to exchange some ideas today. Thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Praveen, and I live in New York, and I run a smart allocation of capital in the last 5 years. Prior to that, I spent almost 18 years as a trader on Wall Street. And what we do right now is focus on using AI and creating financial products and distributing to asset managers and generating alpha.
So let's get started, ladies and gentlemen. And as a chair for the session, I think I'll introduce the topic. Before I introduce the topic, the first thing I felt about saying was that this is kind of the smart manufacturing and Industry 4.0 as a topic is kind of a big reset button that has been pressed on the good global stage. And the reason I'm saying this is, unlike the last few industrial revolutions that we have seen, it was more of an evolution. Yeah, there was about 100 years gap that typically happened between the first one, which was the steam power moving into your electricity coming in and doing manufacturing processes and moving into batch processing, and then continuous processes, and then finally the advent of computers in the 70s and the 80s to what we are seeing today is all kind of evolving in the last 5 to 10 years, if I would say, and 10 years I think is on the outer limits, where the definitions of systems, definitions of what the golden thread or the digital thread, how it runs through, or for example, the way we are looking at digital twin as a strategy, not just for manufacturing, but for general businesses, the boundaries between your supply chain, your OEM manufacturing, your brand, your service supply chain, and your building supply chain, all of that kind of stuff, the way it is collapsing. And then, of course, you add on top of it 3D printing, you add on top of it asset as a service, you get the picture. And all of them, that is happening in real time. The second reset is, this is possibly happening across the world at the same point of time. That means there's no real case studies to look for and say this is the best practice, or the scenarios are such that I think it's all up in the air in terms of question marks as to what do you call a best practice anymore. So given this kind of a situation, and given where Asia is, in the context of Asia, where we are speaking more today, with the young population, with growing economy, you suddenly have, I would say, a very heady mix of the opportunities as well as the threats. So in today's conversation, we would like to bring out those various nuances of what does smart manufacturing mean to us in Asia, in the world, and of course us in Asia. We don't really have to agree on to one final outcome. The goal is to be to look at all the diversity of thoughts, to look at the agreement to disagree, if we may, and have a takeaway which, if nothing else, at least stimulates our gray cells to do something more in the future. So with this, maybe we'll go across the table on the other way, and do capture a little bit of thoughts and ideas more from a practical perspective of application of how do you see that getting applied to our daily lives and to our work and our profession as we speak today. So maybe we'll start from there.
Yeah, from a standpoint of smart allocation of capital, I mean, the way we think about this is One is generating returns, which is easier said than done, and that's something that should be the core focus on at any given time. I mean, as much as you love technology and so on and so forth, is it really actually generating returns for the investor and the shareholders? That's quite important. And secondly, does it solve a client problem? And so these are the couple of things that we constantly keep questioning ourselves when we get into the market. Raise money, deploy money, make products, so on and so forth. Those are all execution issues, but at the core of the business is actually being able to generate returns and servicing the clients, whoever those clients are. And in this endeavor, I would say, at least from my standpoint at Opal Crest, and what we do is primarily focus on the AI part of it, the technology that powers most of the allocation. Now, my background is primarily in the finance, not so much in the manufacturing, but all I can say is that technology at the end of the day is going to be in manufacturing or finance or any of the other industries. So to understand the nitty-gritties of what technology is being built, how is it differentiated, how it is scalable, these are quite important issues that we kind of look at. And finally, I would say that applications are quite important. As much as generic solutions are great, the world is fairly fragmented in terms of the client needs, the geographies, and so on and so forth. So the applications that people develop using these technologies are extraordinarily important, and how differentiated they are, and when they are differentiated enough, which of those differentiated technologies are scalable and is going to be the winner. Yes, I'll just stop there.
Okay, so mainly I'm interested in discussing more around the adaptation and adopting of technologies in changing what we've already got. For example, in terms of my countries, it is a small economy. Obviously, manufacturing isn't the biggest there, but it is growing fast. It's growing at the rate of almost 8%. And there are a number of companies coming in from Japan, from Taiwan, and European coming to Laos to basically build their factories there, building parts, becoming part of the supply chain for certain products, given conditions, given cheap land mass, a lot of facilities. But also in terms of digitization, for example, in hydropower, which is the biggest sector in my country, company like General Electric has come in and looking at our existing infrastructure for hydropower and look at how do they or how are they going to be able to change that and apply digital transformation, collecting all the data points and analyze and get it up to the next level. There's also a lot about managing risks, in this industry. And we've come from, for example, in factories like processing plants. We've done a lot of things in trying to improve efficiencies of the processes, applying IT technologies, but a lot of data are not being managed, are not being analyzed, and a lot of that goes into, we are unable to provide optimization for certain processing lines. I think digital transformation will come in and help us, but I'm concerned about how we go about changing from existing facilities into the next level, and I would like to discuss that further today.
Great points, Vibhun.
So I'm going to see it from the manufacturing perspective. Some of us are seen from a financial perspective. So, like, why do we need smart manufacturing? Why does it have to be smart? So, from my point of view, like, this is my belief. So we have go through like skill labor age of skill labor, where we compete our product in quality, and then the next level we go to is the age of technology, where we compete our technology. And now the technologies is very accessible to like everyone because of the very first information and the invention of internet. So now all the technology is accessible to most people. So now I believe that what we are competing in is in design perspective or the aesthetic part of the product. I'm mainly focusing in end users. So all the end users, they want quality and more than that is what they want is an emotional attachment, or the users are seeing the product in more subjective point of view, not just just for one use. So for example, like some of the rice production, they try to give a social value to the rice product. This part of the portion is going back to the farmers. So when the people are buying those agricultural products, they feel something that this is producing from this area and is going back to their farmers. So, and not just this, I mean all in electrical and electronic products as well. That we like if we were going to look at iPhone, everyone like to have it, everyone like to own it, or they feel some kinds of empowered by it. But if you're going and look out in the market, you can see more advanced technology than this Apple product. Why Apple can exit is they can produce the value that people admire for it. So people are going for the Apple product instead of going for the more advanced technology. So my point is like, why does it have to be smart manufacturing? So we are providing the product for the demand that want emotional attachment. We need to integrate, and we need to be more innovative for that product. So all our manufacturing, not just to be like aggressively producing it, we just need to make it more efficient for individuals. Thank you.
What's the difference between smart manufacturing and wise manufacturing? I think the needs of every manufacturers in the region are different. You don't have to be a $250 billion company to be able to use some of the more basic technologies. So for example, for small, medium-sized manufacturers in the region, you should really try to look at how are you capturing all of your data that's being generated in your factory operations. Okay, and you could go to Microsoft or Amazon Cloud Services. They have tools that will help you monetize those data, keep track of the data, collect the data, format it. So these are small steps that a small, medium-sized manufacturer in this region right now, next week, can start doing to help improve your operations. And then what do you do with the data? Well, there are a lot of things you could do with the data. This is when we talk about wise manufacturing. Because with those data, you're able to predict trends. You're able to fulfill logistics demand faster, easier. You can calculate your cost better. So basically, you're using your own data generated from your factories to help you avoid problems. That's being wise. Okay. So I think that, of course, second main point is that regardless of your size, you should really start looking at how to protect your intellectual property. It does not have to be some fancy American patent, okay? Try to protect your trade secrets, your way of doing things, your customer list, your know-how, your formulaic know-hows. I mean, these are the small steps that you can start doing, implementing right away to become not only smarter, but wiser. Thank you.
Okay, I think everybody has spoken about the technology and the data and this thing. I think I wanted to just focus on three angles. Asia, the consumer and the largest consumer base being here. And thirdly is that provider of capital. So yes, smart manufacturing is definitely a requirement in Asia because the consumer itself is getting smarter and consumer has needs. And also the world's manufacturing, a lot of it is based out of Asia for a reason. Because the largest sort of users of smartphones is in Asia. And so I think it is, another angle is the proximity to consumer. That's something that I think I would love that the panel would cover. Lastly, yes, smart manufacturing, a great word, and everybody is moving towards it, but who's the capital provider for such amount of smart manufacturing? I've got, since we as an investment bank raise capital for many high-tech companies who are setting up manufacturing in Asia, there have been lots of interest as well as mixed feelings in funding the capital for smart manufacturing. So I think we should be covering that topic, and I'd love to sort of share a couple of case studies of smart manufacturing as well as Suman, as he covered, asset as a service, where we are raising capital for a very breakthrough sort of company in Asia. And it'll be great for us to sort of have an open discussion with everybody on that. Thanks.
Yes, smart manufacturing or Industry 4.0 are very grand terms, and it is, I think, not only about how smart you are in the production of goods itself, but it is more how do we get goods from raw materials to consumers, used by consumers, and back into the original supply chain. So the smart manufacturing is actually much broader than the manufacturing itself. It is the whole use of scarce materials to consumers and back into the original supply chain as well. So it's really more smart supply chain than smart manufacturing. So that's statement number one. The ability to do that changes a lot of things, because if you are an OEM and you produce goods, you might not want to sell those goods anymore, but you might want to rent or lease those goods to the end customers. You also want to take control of your product, because actually manufacturing a product for an OEM is only a short period of time. 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. The use of a good by a customer is much longer, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. So the OEM, I think, has an opportunity in smart manufacturing to extend its impact and business beyond just the production itself, but taking control of the whole life cycle of the product all the way to the end of the product as well. And so one thing is important for that is chip technology. So you need chip sensors and RF, NFC type of communication sensors, but also very important here is security, cybersecurity, yes? The fact that OEMs are not at risk of losing their IP to hackers from another country. So in this sense, I also think that Vietnam and other Asian countries certainly are not behind the West, either in the United States or in Europe. I think there's an opportunity here to quickly follow, not lead perhaps, but follow in this trend. Thank you.
So that was, I think, a quick introduction to the various topics that I think encompasses the broad spectrum of smart manufacturing. From my perspective, I would like to add and maybe emphasize, it's actually been spoken about I think 3 things over here. One of them is, the whole asset as a service. What it would mean is that more and more there would be convergence of traditional manufacturing or product as a sector and segment with services segment. And that has actually much more larger implications, and not just from a perspective of technology and use, but also legalities, taxation, for example, the movement and the need to move labor across the world, the knowledgeable part and the not so knowledgeable part of the world, and that's how I think the new kinds of trade and barter would start happening. Effectively, what we're talking about is a knowledge economy. And if you understand right, knowledge is information in context. And that's what a part of it is addressed as when you talk about mass customization of products, where you talk about how you create an emotional underpinning of your product. But now it is an emotional underpinning of the entire knowledge because you need to bring in the context to that knowledge. The second part of it is the area of the security, which has been raised over here, because now this security is not just about tightening security in your own factory or in your own company, because your product that you're shipping it out is sending out beacon back into your factory. So if the threat of a hack is not just somebody hacking into your corporate system and your firewalls, but the threat of a hack is actually in the system which is operating in the field. And imagine if that system is a pacemaker. And somebody hacks into the pacemaker through a patient and hacks into all the pacemakers that you've supplied in that match. Pretty scary, right? So I think there is a definitive need for collaboration and standards over there. And last but not the least is going back to the whole definition of capital allocation. I think that capital allocation will not just depend on business processes, which earlier defined whether it's an investable business or not an investable business, but across the whole definition of the product, because the product will lead into processes, which will lead into services, which will lead into different business models based on the context of that same product or service in different countries. So you have to trace it back to the product, and the intent and the heart of the product. It can be a definition which is developed again globally. So I think the modern manufacturing companies or the product companies which would be emerging and which are already emerging are actually multi-geographic product development. And we are seeing, my past employer, I spent a long time with one of the world's largest manufacturing product company, an European manufacturing product company, and I can tell you that maybe more than 70% of the IP that we generated was not generated out of the home country. In fact, I don't know whether we can call ourselves even anymore a company which had a home country. So in this change of, some call it the VUCA world, the volatile, uncertain world, some call it a land of opportunity. Let us spend the next part of our conversation on asking each other some questions as to where do you see the opportunities, where do you see the risk? Because that's finally what will define maybe some of the go-forward actions that we can discuss about. So maybe I'll take it the other way around, and I'll put it on to you. Where do you see the opportunity or the risk, maybe also in the context of Asia?
I think there are many risks and opportunities. They go together, obviously. I think broadly, I would like to identify two or three. I think the typical model for the OEM to manufacture a good, deliver it to a customer, and then service it has a big opportunity to change that and to become part of their customer in a way. Extending the product interaction with the customers and the closeness with the customers to a very big extent, but also controlling their business network into the future as well. Today, you often see that after 3, 4, 5 years, competitors come in and pirates come in. But if you control the asset with the customer, and you still own it, so you rent it out, for example, you have a much better control over your business processes with your customers. So I think that that's a really big opportunity for many companies. I think there is also an opportunity for societies and governments to take a different, area. Visibility in the use of products in, connected business processes, like blockchain type of processes as well, will give more transparency on transactions, and also the possibility for governments to increase, the quality of the supply chain, the adherence to certain quality guidelines, but also to raise more taxes as well. So I would say for the government, there's also some opportunities.
So could you give an example, any example that comes to your mind? And I would request everybody to sort of cite some practical examples that you can cite. Could you give an example, please?
Yes, I can give you a very good example, I think. The sale of MRI scanners to medical centers, to hospitals. Today, this is sold by companies. They sell it to the hospital, and the hospital uses it, and it is serviced or not serviced. In the future, this does not need to be sold anymore, so it can be rented. The big advantage of that is that also hospitals and medical centers that might not have the budget to buy equipment can actually get the equipment and use the equipment. So it actually opens up the availability of what are expensive assets to a much wider group of customers, and also, customers who perhaps might otherwise not be able to pay it. Yes. So that's one example. Another example would be the tagging of consumer products. Yes, if you tag consumer products, and every product needs a tag and has a secure chip and identification on it, then the transparency and the visibility of the whole supply chain and the adherence to quality guidelines improves a lot. So we will see that billions and billions of RFID tags, very simple chips and sensors, will be used for these type of purposes. The benefit of this is also for consumers that counterfeit can be better controlled, quality of product data, end of life of the products can be much better monitored. So those are, I think, two examples of an implementation. Twin identities, you mentioned that already. If you have an asset in the field, you can, for example, when you have a secure connection with the asset, you can actually pre-test, product upgrades, improvements, software and hardware improvements in the field before you do that. So those are three, I would say, areas that you could, that are more, let's say, to the point. Yes.
I'll come back to you for some questions on risks later, but that's later. Over to you, Raju.
Opportunities and risks, I think the opportunities are huge. Rather than just giving you all a general line, I'd rather discuss a example of a company that where we've been a client of ours, which has been a sort of a disruptor. So we've all heard of SaaS, which was a couple of years back, which is software as a service. Then came data as a service with guys like IBM and cloud and this, that coming in. And movie as a service, Netflix. Transport as a service, Grab. Nobody's heard of air condition as a service. So there is a disruptor, which is a company called Care, and which is basically providing air conditioning as a service to several hospitals, malls, offices, all over Asia. It's an Asian company and we are in Asia, so I thought that we might as well discuss a one of the 18 sort of, breakthrough models that the United Nations has sort of identified. So, that is as an example. So what's the opportunity over there? The opportunity over there is naturally, ultimately, it is the consumer who's the beneficiary. Why is he the beneficiary over here? Because the office complex or the hospital and XYZ is just buying air conditioning as a service for somebody. So what is what is the consumer doing? So what is he's paying lesser. And what is the utility guy and what is the real estate company that owns the asset doing? Since he can see what since it's a pay-per-use model, he can also sort of arrange for capital as well as foresee or forecast what the revenues would be. At the end of this whole thing is the consumer is the beneficiary. Risks. A lot of the, so this company will be putting in a huge amount of capital and will be owning the asset. Who's funding that? And how is it being funded? So that I think is a risk, and there is a huge amount of capital that goes into this. Another example would be a company where we are trying to raise capital for, which is one of the sort of pioneering companies in smart metering. I think if everybody has heard of that, the world has to put in about 800 million, and the governments are backing that 800 million smart meters are to be put in various people's homes globally. India itself is about 250 million smart meters. So, my thing is that, yes, there is huge opportunity for companies to come and manufacture smart meters, and there is a consumer over there, but who's going to be paying for it? And that's that's what I think is the risk around this, of how capital is going to be allocated to fund all sorts of smart manufacturing going forward.
I think the way that we would manufacture things would change drastically with the rise of 3D printing, so-called additive printing. The U.S. Department of Commerce, they've been calling for public comments on how to treat 3D printing. I think if you're in the business of making light or medium things, I would say 80% of ASEAN is in that market. I would be very concerned because 3D printing is a way to go after the low-hanging fruits. Okay, if it's easy to make, the consumer themselves can make it directly using 3D printing. Okay, so that's why, again, it comes back to technology. How do you make your fruit higher? And the way to do that is to be able to use the newer enabling technologies like AI, for lack of a better word, which is really glorified statistical analysis. But in order to do that, you need data, which leads me to my second point. In the ASEAN countries, there's a lot of talks about non-trade barriers, or the barriers that you can't really see. A lot of the ASEAN countries, including China, they've been passing data sovereignty laws, or what I call data localization laws. Laws that require all data generated within a country to remain in the country. And in some cases, all data is subject to police search. Okay, so if you're doing any sort of massive R&D in that country, and the police comes and take away your servers, your R&D project is pretty much shot. Okay, so these are the things that, from an opportunity and from a risk perspective, how to manage data will become increasingly important if you're running any sort of manufacturing operations. Data management, and also on the watch out for 3D printing or even 4D printing. Cheers.
Thanks, William. And just a conjecture on that would be, if you do 3D printing, just think about the disruption in the transportation sector, because now you won't have these large fleets of trucks carrying your manufactured product from a supplier to the OEM. The OEM would be pretty much printing the stuff at his or her facility or close in proximity to the customer. So the expectation is that once 3D printing goes live, which it is, by the way, airline industry, a large part of the manufactured parts for an airplane is already 3D printed. You would be disrupting nearly 50% of the global transportation industry, be it land transportation or sea transportation.
And unfortunately, 3D printing will hit the low-hanging manufacturers the hardest. I mean, the light, medium-sized manufacturers, and there are many of them based in this region, and
Absolutely.
they will get hit first, you know.
The SME manufacturing, as you rightly said, is going to be the hardest hit. So if there's anybody who's an SME manufacturer in this room, it's a cause for your nightmare in the short term. Maybe much better things will happen and emerge, but in the short term, it's a cause for your nightmare.
For the opportunities, I would like to focus on the Asia's developing countries. For Asian developing countries like us, Myanmar, we are receiving lots of investments and all the employment as well. Before, like, we have lots of unemployment. Now we are having lots of employment from international corporations, and especially from China as well, because China is part of Asia, but some of the work we get from China is huge, but basically those are contract manufacturing. So the technology is still in the factory, but still we have employment. So we see lots of raise in capital and investment in those developing countries. I can also see that it's going to be the same in Laos and Cambodia and Indonesia as well. Another thing that I see is in terms of risks, I see regulations problem and the unskilled labor, because if like for example Coca-Cola coming to Myanmar, they have a Six Sigma, some kind of quality control system, and when they want to do that, our people, they don't know what Six Sigma is, what kind of control system is that, so we have to train all the way. So what we will be facing is a human resource problem. Another thing is that regulations. So in most of the Southeast Asian country, the regulation is quite soft. So sometimes I think they really don't know what the market needs. So the government regulations and the real market demand is quite different. So what happened is, like, for example, back in my country also, we have a solar panel project where we want to provide electrical for rural areas. But the suppliers, they try to supply, it's a tender bid. So they bid that tender and the supply was not right quality. So they can only supply for like 3 to 4 hours for the houses. But because of those regulations, the government wasn't, advised quite to the extent. So those solar panels wasn't a success. So what a user feel is that solar doesn't work. They feel like solar is a waste of technology, or this product doesn't work. So if we have a stronger regulations in those areas, we can reduce the risks. This is what I see. Thank you.
Thanks.
I'll be very short on this because I think a lot of our speakers have touched on. In the scheme of things, I agree that it's going to be a whole host of opportunities because it's really digital economy. There's going to be new jobs, new businesses. For example, country like Thailand, our neighbor, is talking about Thailand 4.0, encouraging people to go into businesses around the new digital economy. From factory point of view, I think if we are talking about horizontal integration, we still have a lot to do around how do we continuously improve our processes. And we've come to the point where it's so much data, so complicated, so complex that all our process engineers or our top engineers would not be able to analyze. So you're talking about technology that provides opportunity to optimize by utilizing Internet of Things, AI, that are just basically able to do things very quickly, adapting to changing conditions. You know, for, I guess as an example is the, you know, in terms of planning or predicting failures in the system, you know, we would want to be able to be very predictive and very able to plan down time, able to be ahead of the curves all the time. But also in terms of customers, which is the, you know, what I would say is the vertical integration, the products and whatnot. I agree that we'll be able to, you know, be adopting very quickly into that. In overall, I think the digital economy will level the field in terms of, you know, you can do manufacturing and you can compete even from the developing countries like in Asia. Thank you.
From our perspective, the way we think about this is kind of introduce a concept that we use internally ourselves. It's called data balance. The way we think about data balance is when we think about financial payments, we look at any kind of external, internal imbalances in portfolios and economy and everything. You still always have an imbalance, and you try to actually, your objective is to kind of go against that imbalance and try to bring out an equilibrium. And in our business, the way we think about that is any business generates data and also consumes data. Everyone talks about Asia producing a lot of data, which is great. We understand that, which means that I as a business, I'm going to be consuming a lot of data. So in some ways, actually that's a risk. The way we think about that is that from an external imbalance standpoint, we are actually negative imbalance there. Because I'm going to be consuming a lot of data from Asia and not producing as much data that I'm going to supply to the market. And that is something that we are extraordinarily cognizant of. So when we build our products, all the time we are thinking about every product should have a data surplus, which means that you could start with a negative imbalance of actually consuming the data, producing the model, eventually spitting out the signals or the way that you're thinking about. And even if it relates to smart manufacturing, if you're getting data from process controls and so on and so forth, but at some point, you need to look at the velocity curve of data input versus data output. And you need to get to a point at how fast you can actually get to a point where you're going to have that surplus, because that's what is going to create a competitive edge. And that surplus that you create is going to make you stand out. Otherwise, the rate at which the technology is growing, everyone is talking about it in a very positive way, which is true though. Like you mentioned a point about Azure and Amazon and in terms of the air conditioning as a service, which is all great, but that also reduces the entry barriers for other firms to get in. And that is something that one needs to be worried about. The velocity at which things are developing is extraordinarily fast that you can even imagine. So if you think that smart manufacturing is going to defeat the traditional manufacturing, guess what? You're going to get run over by the other smart manufacturing guy coming in pretty quickly. And so from our business standpoint, this is one of the main risks that we actually foresee and perceive, and we always are trying to beat that.
So maybe I'll ask my first question to Praveen. Praveen, on the contrary to what the point that you said, that your entry barriers are actually going down. That's what I heard. What if I believe that we are actually staring at the opposite? We are actually staying at large capital, cornering the same way the global healthcare industry got cornered by some of the largest drug manufacturers, which took away the capability to innovate and bring a product to the market. The large companies, and the examples, the names that you spoke, whether it's Amazon, whether it's the Microsoft of the world, because of their strange hold on the data lake, they will pretty much start building entry barriers, large entry barriers for companies to innovate at scale and not pay toll. So essentially they will become the toll takers. And that would essentially stop the data velocity from reaching the optimal levels that you have envisaged.
Yeah, fair enough. The way we think about this is data is produced by every individual at every moment of time. And that's happening, whether it's a large company getting in, they're trying to corner the market, which is absolutely quite possible. But that being said, they don't control how much data you and I as an individual produce. And that is something subjected to our consumption of different instruments and gadgets and what we are using at any given time. So businesses are built around these data points, and they are solving client problems. And the products that come out of this, they kind of do hit a wall where you can say, well, yeah, the big companies like Microsoft or Amazon could be actually one of those guys who are cornering that. But the way I would think about this is more of a positive way, where actually they become the distributors for your products that you're actually building. And maybe as a company that you're built to a scale, maybe you grew it from a $0 to a 10 million to a 50 million, after which maybe you do not have the capacity to grow. And that's when actually the Microsofts get into the business. And it's totally fine to do that. Maybe it brings in efficiency. But I wouldn't be really worried about the fact that right now there are big companies out there and you cannot do it. Because one of the things that it's just a general rule. I mean, I think it would be very hard to disagree that creativity dies with the size going up. And the way I think about opportunity and risk is you're on the same metric. So creativity is the same metric that goes in from opportunity to risk. And the moment the creativity becomes a risk is when it overshoots. And that's the way I think about the big company versus the small company issue.
Fair point. I think we will open the discussion up to the audience. If there are questions, I have a few of my own questions, but it's a time for the audience to ask some questions and give some hard-hitting ones. So while the audience is gearing up for the questions, let me ask them some of my other questions. So for example, the point that you raised about skills. What do you think is going to be the future skill model? Because one of the questions that's been going around is traditional education stroke skill development still valid, where a kid was taken in years of education at school, went to the university, did years of education at the university, and then expected to serve for 35 years, 40 years of lifetime, and then retire into the sunset? Will this model be still applicable? So in countries where you are, in terms of your fights with skill, I think you also raised the point of skill. How do you see that getting solved?
I also had a question for both Vibhun as well as Xuan. Since they both come from Laos and Myanmar, I think 10 years back when we brought in a couple of large manufacturing giants from the West to India, I think skill was something that was really lacking. And would love to understand how it is in Laos and Myanmar, as well as the regulatory environment, as in how's the government supporting it. And are they putting in policies for thing? Because there are lots of interest from investors in both the countries. But I don't have the knowledge. It will be great to understand that, because ultimately we all hear that manufacturing is moving to these countries. So it will be great to understand from you, the two of you, what's happening on the.
First, take the question on the skill, and then you can take the question, and then we can both have a conversation around the skills topic. By the way, I don't think that the situation in India has changed in the last 10 years. The chasm has only deepened.
I didn't want to say that it has worsened, but just keeping it stable there.
Yeah, it's an interesting question around skill development for the digital economy. But first of all, and this is my understanding, I think the government from my country is seeing digital transformation or digital economy is a sort of a must, a survival, rather than something that is nice to have. It's, if you don't get into onto the bus, you probably won't be able to compete, and we probably going to have to jump, rather than just adopting traditional development of the technologies or adopting the technologies. We probably have to go into industry 4.0, and if we fast enough, we'll probably catch up. But in terms of skills, there's going to be a huge challenge. However, I see this from an optimistic view that while we probably will lose number of labor-intensive manufacturing, putting technologies in, we probably have to skill up and work with international companies or work with internationals to try to build our skill pool. Yeah. But I don't see that, for example, in Laos, we are a very small population, and we probably need to work closely with our international companies to be able to adjust to digital transformation in certain way. As I said before, and an example is that a lot of our hydropower plants, company like GE is offering to look at how they try to digitize, the processes, the way the production, collecting data, doing analysis, making the machines a bit smarter in terms of reacting to many changing parameters and managing risk in that way. So a lot of that will mean that GE will also need to invest in skills development for the hydropower plant operators. That's all I can say. Thanks.
For the issue of skills labor, I mean, the way I understand it, the issues run really deep. Like, it's go into our education system as well, because of the question from you. So to solve it, this is also the way I see it. For example, our bachelor students and all the fresh graduate in engineering field, they are all playing with like Raspberry Pi and those new tech devices, and they can really make something like a traffic system or anything with the Raspberry Pi, what it can do. But what they are missing is what's really operating in it. What kinds of IC, what kinds of chips are in it, and how they are operating it. So we are kind of advanced in some of the level, but we don't know how we are operating it. So we need to go back to the basic concept. So we really have to study and build those gap. And if we can build that gap, that in the theoretical levels of the basics things, how engineering basic, I just want to point out like engineering basic, also in others area, also other education system, they need to fill in those basic education, because our basic education is not strong. So when we being employed in our jobs, in our workplaces, we just do the text what is given. We just study from that point. We couldn't connect back with what we have studied in high school, what we have studied in middle school. So if we can fill that gap, I think our skill level issue can be solved. Especially what I see in like Burma, also in like Southeast Asian countries, all our skill level, they can create things, they can do more work. But what they are lacking is the basic theory. That's the way I see it. About the regulation problem also is go back to the education issue. If government people who are in charge can really understand and tackle the problems, what they have to regulate. If they really understand the problem, they can solve it. That's what I think.
Oh, we have a question from the audience.
Yeah, hi. Thanks. The audio is terrible in this place. We need smart audio. The whole concept of IoT and smart manufacturing is the creation of a human resource deficient region. US and Europe, they don't have people. Asia, we have people. Are we accepting a construct which is not meant for Asia, and we are accepting it without questioning it? We think it's cool to do it, so we decided that, let's just automate. We have so many people. I mean, you don't have to do it instantly. Why do we have to accept that if all of Asia decides that we are going to do manufacturing in the way that suits us, then if whatever the West is outsourcing to this part of the world can be done at our terms? Why aren't we doing that?
don't think technology is a zero-sum game. I think AI is not the threat. I think 3D printing is more of a threat than automation, robotics. The way that I don't think it's also either east versus west, because for example, I take Taiwan for example, okay? Taiwan Semiconductors, I could tell you most of the operations are automated, okay? And yet there's plenty of jobs available in the other sectors in Taiwan. Basically, the way we see it is we are saving the human being from the drudgery of the grime and the grimy part of the work, okay? So that human capital can be retrained and redeployed in other high value added areas. I think that's something that should transcend nationalities and global parts territorialism.
Yes. I don't think that smart manufacturing or IoT has anything to do special with cheap labor in Asia. We see that smart manufacturing and IoT process will be adopted and implemented with success and without success in the West, and with success and without success in the East. Yes, I think it is nothing to do with lower labor by itself. Yes.
But the roots of automation is lack of people.
No, not really. I don't think the root is lack of scarce resources, and people is one of the scarce resources, but you have many more scarce resources as well. There's an opportunity, of course, for the lower level scarce resources that you can do in a developing country that can maybe not be done as well in a development country. I think the biggest skill that we need to learn in the West is how do you stay happy if you're not employed all your life anymore. Not everybody is looking forward to that situation, but that is also one of, in the West, it's not all positive as well, right?
So we'll take a question. Is it a question?
I have a question.
Sure, please.
Mr. Chairman, I believe in the seed of smart manufacturing. Many SMEs, small, medium enterprises, are being left out. Small, medium enterprises, they're being left out. Many of them are not able to cope up with the changes. So what do you see for them to come, how they should look at it?
So anybody wants to take that question first? He said he feels that the small and medium enterprises are kind of excluded from the story of smart manufacturing, and what should be the strategy to get them included?
Yeah, I think there are going to be huge or large manufacturing bases, and because the volumes are going to be large. I think in any SME sort of manufacturing situation, I think being supplier, and I like the way my friend said that, on the supply chain, so the large manufacturers can't do everything. So, being suppliers of components to the large manufacturers where many of the SMEs have scored, and each one of them create a sort of a niche for themselves. And I've seen that in the EMS industry, where there's an entire supply chain, where many SMEs survive. I think, that's something that you've got to work towards. But at the end of the day, I think even the SMEs have to adapt to new technology. So otherwise, it's not going to, I don't think it's going to be easy to survive something like that.
Anybody else wants to take it a shot? Because I have on continuing with the conversation on what he asked in terms of automation, and I having spent in the region, outside the region, representing some of the largest of the Western manufacturing and brands, well, I used to believe that the world was not a zero-sum game, but I can say that things are changing. So my belief over here is we have to keep our radars open. It is not going to be one size fits all. In fact, one of the point I want to, and I'm not saying that people have to agree to the point, but one of the point I'm to put on the table over here is, if the demand is largely in Asia, and and Africa, for example, a very young continent, the largest part of the manufacturing is today happening in Asia. What stops from Asia to come up with their own standards? Because please understand, today the automation standards that we are talking about are all Western automation standards. There is, I think, a definitive opportunity for Asia and the governments to collaborate and build. It is pretty much like the BHS Vitamax story replaying after 40 years. Whoever will get the standard will get the IP. The profitability will not be in making the hardware anymore. We have seen how the hardware industry, for example, in the world, the IT hardware industry have become a matter of non-entity. It is the software and now the applications and the services, which is where the apps have moved up. I think the similar thing will happen over here. So in this changing world, I do believe that we cannot fall back on the age-old parenthesis of technology has always been beneficial for the humankind, but yes, it happened over a larger period of time. With a short period of time, you just cannot look into a person and say, oops, you lost your job, maybe your grandchild will do better. You can't. So there is a need for Asia, for governments, for people, in my opinion, to be very vigilant about what's happening and to come up with their own strategy and not just follow the textbook or the blue book of the West.
The question that's coming to my mind is, where should governments really be focusing? Because when we talk about disruption, whether it's due to fourth industrial revolution or whether it's because of artificial intelligence, you're largely talking about technology, right? And that means substantial gains. So that also to me means that the jobs for future generations, tomorrow's graduates, are taken care of. But what about this massive numbers of working class people? I mean, I don't even know if any governments are focusing adequately on, their jobs being lost. And I'm wondering, looking into the next 5 years, where should the focus be? Taking care of these people who are already working, who don't know how to cope with this disruption, or focusing on ensuring jobs for tomorrow's graduates?
Well, I mean, it's a very interesting question. I don't think definitely do not have an answer for that, but I can give my opinion what I think people will. Okay, sorry. Yeah, my opinion. I think the first thing is people need food. As much as we might say, well, and the food on the table comes from working. And the government has to come up with schemes where they actually make every citizen in their country, in their state, comfortable that you don't have to worry about technology taking over and you still have food on the table. And that's number one. Number two is that they provide substantive education, and education is a changing field. Right now, if you think, well, yeah, everyone can learn technology and get into AI or other new fancy things, it's just not easy. I mean, it's just not like suddenly you just cannot shift fields. So that is something that, again, that particular transformation, the government needs to step in and they have to create that possible. And finally, in terms of transfer of wealth, like you said, like, yeah, I mean, if I get fired and I'm told that, yeah, guess what, like your grandchild is going to be better off, so you should be okay. Well, I'm not okay, actually. So I'm going to be pretty pissed off about that if I get fired. And so the point is, so that's another thing, like people need to be made sure that there should be some kind of a transfer mechanism, that the government actually puts a universal basic income or some kind of a safety net saying that, hey, you don't have to worry about it. So there are 2 or 3 things that the government can definitely look at and say, well, I cannot go in and look at a particular population in terms of the kids or the older people or something, but I can definitely take care of education, I can take care of food and take care of the basic income. And if they actually devise policies around that, I think it's a great start. I don't think it's going to be doable because it's extraordinarily a difficult job to do, but it's a very good point, though.
Yeah. Actually, I would say the government should be focusing on upskilling of workers and labor, and rather than focusing on how many are going to lose their jobs. Because technology, like the way I think, taking a cue from what William just said, is that technology is there to change the world. It's not East versus West and this thing, and Asia versus the rest. I think it is going to be the consumer who's going to be the beneficiary of everything. And I think governments need to, take this seriously. And I think across Asia, we find that skills are not there, and upskilling of people is very, very important for everybody to survive. Companies have to survive, so so do individuals. That's the way I see it.
Yes, I thought it was a really good question. So this is, if we talk about Industry 4.0, we are basically talking about an enormous industrial new wave that is coming to society, and we've seen in the past that society has changed as well. And I think that one of the elements that was mentioned already is different ways to handle society. So in Europe, we are, for example, experimenting with things like basic income for everybody. So you don't need to work for your basic income anymore, but you have an income and you can decide what you do on top of that. So I think that's, I don't have an answer for that, but I would expect that the society has to change as well, and that basic income for everybody is one of the building blocks of that new society.
William?
I think that this is more of a philosophical problem, because the job of the company is not to think about that part. The job of the company is to maximize shareholders' returns, okay? And then it's the duty of the board to do that part. And whether or not they're going to use technology to achieve that end, that's the way the system works. From the government's perspective, I think people rely too much on governments to step in. So what is left? It's the community. I don't think there's been much talk about society, the community aspect of what is going on in this world. We live at a time of extraordinary change. And what we have lost, more so in Europe, is the touch to religion or some sort of spiritual grounding, okay? Now, the Pew Research Institute in the US did a study. Those who attended some sort of worship, place of worship, actually fare better in all aspects of life. I find that we don't talk about spirituality or religion. Well, we must now, because the society, the community is the one that's going to wind up taking care of all those people that will not be able to find work because they couldn't adapt fast enough. Okay, you heard about the angel investors. Well, they're typically mom, dad, your uncles, investing in your venture. That's one example of society, well, close community, stepping in, taking the slack that governments cannot or will not do, and companies certainly will not do. So that I think this is why Asia will do it better than the West. This is when I do find that East and West divide matters. I find Asian communities are more closely bonded. We all come from that background. And I find that in some way this is also true in the West, but I don't want to generalize. But I think the extent of community strength would be the key factor in deciding whether or not a country is able to solve the technology problem or be a slave to it.
Well, I have a take which I think is synchronizes in many ways, but it is also different. So first of all, I think the easiest path out for a government is to do UBI, or Universal Basic Income. It's like the baby is crying, give him a pacifier. It doesn't solve the problem. If the baby is hungry and therefore the baby is crying, it doesn't solve the problem of hunger. It just stops the baby crying at that point of time. I think, yes, skills is sure, but again, what will you develop the person on? The research says that 50% of the skills that the individual learns will be obsolete in 5 years, and maybe 80% in 7 years. So, and coming back to the point of corporate responsibility to shareholders versus stakeholder, I think here is the hypocrisy. The hypocrisy is, you ask any chief executive of any Fortune 500 company, they will always say stakeholders' interest. They will not say shareholders' interest. Shareholders' interest was very Keynesian. They will call stakeholder interest, but what they really mean is what exactly William said, which is shareholder interest. So how do you make corporations be accountable for stakeholder? and not just for the shareholder, and especially when your shareholder could be an iTrader. So I think these are philosophical questions, and we are at a cusp of, in a revolution, when you do a revolution, like in a normal word, it's not just a political revolution, right? It's social revolution, it's artistic revolution, it's everything that happens together. It's a new way of life. I think this is, in many ways, this is the conversation, where the conversation should lead to. It should lead around education, it should lead around spirituality, it should lead around workforce. Yes, you can chip in your points.
Yes. I think one of the attractions of a universal basic income for everybody is that it reduces the cost of the government enormously and thereby reduces taxation, which helps the companies and the shareholders as well.
I can make a point on the universal, though I am a proponent, like philosophically I'm a proponent of universal basic income, but I see a huge moral hazard in that. And we are, in a way, I would hate to call it, if someone brings food on the plate, we will become lazy over a period of time. And I personally do not like that. So I do not have an answer, but you're right, you need to provide that universal basic income so that people are liberated to do what they would like to do and hence foster innovation and do things otherwise. I totally agree with that, but I also feel that there is a big moral hazard of doing this. And I don't have a solution, but I think people are debating about this.
You know, this is what, if you read Yuval Harari in his latest book, he talks about the useless class. We may end up creating 97% of the humanity as useless class.
Let me share something quickly. Just a few weeks ago, I was in Melbourne discussing around ASEAN, Australia infrastructure skills. And I think the model is pretty simple, but I agree with William that we should not just rely on the government. It's just going to be the triangle of the government, the private sectors, and the training or skill development providers. And when they come together and with the industry-led skills, we can actually do something to predict. Yeah, we cannot solve the problem with one silver bullet, but certainly we can try. And I think what they are trying to do is to predict what's coming in terms of skills needs in the market, in terms of what we need to do to reskill certain workforces. I think this model is what we are trying to do between ASEAN and Australia at least. Yep.
Well, interest of the time, I think we will just quickly go around the table, but if there are any questions, please butt in. Yeah, sorry, you have a question. Please go ahead.
My name is Eric from Indonesia. I have a question for Xuan and Vibun. So far the panel has discussed about the skills, data fragmentation, and security. I had a short discussion with William yesterday about Indonesia, how we are self-reliant and we are not really depending on government. So my question is that we have 3 challenges in Indonesia. Maybe you can also help to chip in about how you think in implementing smart manufacturing with IoT. The first one is integration. So we all know that for smart manufacturing, the machineries, they have to become smart. And in Indonesia, most of the manufacturers, they have just ordinary machine. Replacing that with new machineries will cost a lot. That's the first one. The second thing is connectivity. Relevant to IoT and also smart manufacturing, it will deploy or employ a lot of wireless connection. While in Indonesia, the manufacturers, the management will favor wired connection versus wireless connection. That's the second thing. The third one is financing. A lot of Indonesian manufacturers, we have struggles or challenges in terms of how to convince the top management regarding, let's say, not full implementation, but only, let's say, trials. And how do we finance this smart manufacturing? So these are the 3 aspects that I want to us, maybe hear about your opinions as well. Thank you.
William? Okay. No, I thought you had a point yesterday, so why don't you just place it on the point?
They have changes in governments a lot at Indonesia as part of the local political scene. And then that gives startups a drop dead date. They have basically every 5 years to make it happen. And it's very driven by private sector assistance because the government changes so fast. They don't have a policy on key and industrial indicators. And that's what we're talking about, Grab and GoGo Jet, how these startups are basically formed in that part of the world. I go, what? That is democracy in action, that a startup made in Indonesia will stand a test of time versus a startup created in an environment where there's no diversity and there's centralized politics, that makes things a lot easier for that startup within that country. But once that startup leaves that country, from the safety of home, can they compete globally? I mean, so having a very dynamic, diverse, intense home jurisdiction is a great way to create a healthy startup.
Why don't you?
There's for the switching cost, but for Myanmar, we're not as developed as Indonesia yet. We're still, going to that place. But for us, we have a lot of international company and corporate coming in, but those people, they're just newcomers. So all our industry, the smart one, they just stay as a smart one. The old one, they just stay as the old one. The old industrialists, they haven't have enough courage or enough knowledge to integrate to what you just said, to Industry 4.0. So we haven't seen that kind of problem yet. People are thinking of switching to a more advanced one. But when they start with the smartest one, the new one. So for the communication system also, when you look at Myanmar's mobile network, they started with 2G, but they integrated to 4G very quickly. Now, if you compare in Southeast Asia, Myanmar's internet is one of the cheapest. So for that connectivity issues, we don't have it. And we are employing it everywhere. And Mandalay, the second city of Myanmar, they just got a Smartest City Award at the second place in Southeast Asia region. Why? Because we have those fast connectivities from telecommunications such as Ooredoo and Telenor. They provide very fast internet with a very cheap price.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I would add also, it is a challenging question around try to digitize existing assets. I've seen a company which I won't mention name, invest a lot of money in, for example, integrating SAP. Given they've got an asset in Laos, they've got an asset in Europe and Australia and whatnot, and millions of dollars, hundreds of, even up to tens of millions of dollars into it, without a clear understanding of the return in creating value. It will be the same challenge around, applying certain new technologies with existing equipment or replacing them altogether. But I think that the good part is you can see that lots of curves around technologies becoming cheaper and more affordable, like sensoring technologies, even things like in terms of renewable energies, a cost curve is just like that. So I think that eventually, when you look at the model, you'll be able to say that, if you invest in making or modernizing your factories, then you get better outcome, and that outcome justifies your investment. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
I'll take a shot at your question by saying we must stop thinking about this big bang approach to modernization. That's again, sorry for often using that word, it's a very, very concept that comes from the West because it had to be done that way. Over here, I think you take take the processes which is hurting you the most at this point of time. So if it's your customer satisfaction and the visibility of how the customer is using your product, or if it's your, for example, your supply chain integration, forward and backward supply chain integration, just take that process. Think through that process. And today, fortunately, yellow products, which is existing brownfield products, you don't need to go through an OBC and an onboard computer and a modern system to modernize it. You can throw in sensors, you can start reading in sensors, put it into the data lake, start looking at custom specific applications in automation or AI, which would read and start giving you insights into your, and they could be developed for you, or they could be third-party applications which you can bring in and which you can start pretty much reading your data right away. In fact, right now, given that there is a huge amount of asset imbalance in the world, you will find actually lots and lots of yellow products with still 50%, 40% of its life, mechanical life, still available. You can modernize them pretty much like at a fraction of a cost than buying a new product, literally fraction. When I'm saying fraction, it's like 10%, 15% of the cost of buying a new product by putting in censored applications, and you can turn them pretty much into as good as, if not better than what your newer machines would actually work at. So I think the way to modernize your factory would be not by doing, I'm going to change all the machines to a newer generation machine and put all the latest in state of art and then kind of grapple with your return, but rather take a very frugal approach. So frugality would be key for Asia. You had a point? Oh, no, I did not. Okay. Do you want? So I think in interest of time, we are just on an hour for wrapping up the session. So we will. Do you want to do maybe a 1 second or 1 minute kind of a wrap up? Of.
Yes, sure. I think a number of times, and also your last question was also really a little bit: is this smart manufacturing and IoT something that is only for the Western countries and the bigger companies? Actually, I think what we see in Europe and in the United States is that is not the case. It is actually a new hotbed for startups or smaller medium-sized enterprises, farmers as well. So I don't, of course the big companies will be beneficiaries, but it opens up a whole new range of, possibilities for lagging countries, for example, or inspiring countries, aspiring countries is probably the better term as well. So smart manufacturing is not beholden to just the bigger companies and the Western or the more advanced economies. I think just the other way, it opens up for SMEs and aspiring economies as well.
A quick answer to his capital raising. So there's a lot of capital available in Asia to fund all the projects if you find difficulties. And there are lots of risk capital available and to fund at pilot stages, and there are lots of structures. So we can discuss that offline. A quick sum up of what I think of smart manufacturing. I think it's technology is here to stay, and it has to be adapted. And I would say, in a nutshell, is that the consumer is in Asia, and capital is there to fund that. That's my conclusion of what it is.
I just think about the difference between smart manufacturing and wise manufacturing.
So all the questions come around when people hear smart manufacturing, they think that it's like the whole machines replacing all employment, but it's not. It's here to integrate with their workforce. And when the machine is employed, it's not employed for the whole intelligent and decision making. It's just employed for the narrow intelligent areas. That's all.
Yeah, so looking forward to different opportunities, and if there's anyone interested in, I'm not sure how many people of you have been to Laos. If you have the opportunity, let me know. But I think I'm positive about the future. I think it's going to be a lot of challenge, but we'll get through.
Yeah, I have just 2 points is for the investors, make money. For the clients, make them happy. You will be smart.
Well, I think that summarizes pretty much the view. Be smart, be wise, make money, and enjoy the conference. Thanks for listening to all of us.